Here we are back on the slide presentation. As I mentioned, there are three ways to cite your reference in text. If you recall, there's two places you need to cite: in the text of your lab report, and that will refer the reader to your reference page at the end of your lab report. You'll be using the superscript numbers. You make your statement and then you put a period and you have this little number um, after your statement. Here's an example that shows the two places you can put that superscript number whenever you're referring to another source. Recall that this is not your own ideas, not your own work, so it needs to be cited. So after you make your statement, you can put it at the end, or you can name the author within the sentence and put that superscript number right after the author. Either way, that's going to refer the reader to the complete reference at the end of your lab report. So you'll have your numbers consecutively. You may have cited 5 different sources and they would be numbered 1 through 5, and you then document where that source is found. So you have in the case of a journal article, you have your author's name, last name with a comma, their initials, the title of the article, the title of the journal that article is contained within, in italicized print using the official CASI abbreviation for that journal. You'll have the year of publication in bold because that's a very important consideration in science. When was something published? So they put that in bold for journal articles. A comma, the volume number in italicized print, the issue number in regular print in parentheses, a comma, the page that information came from, a period, and then the DOI, Digital Object Identifier. And we did talk about this in the last segment, so you should understand about those. So this slide summarizes what you need for a book reference, a journal reference, and for other materials. For any of these, what you need is sufficient information so that the reader can locate where you found your information. So for a book, that would include the author or editor, the title of the book, the publisher, the city where it was published, and the year of publication. Journal references have additional pieces because they have two titles, both the title of the article and the title of the journal. They have volume numbers and issue numbers. And for websites and so forth, again, you have to have enough information so that the source can be identified and located. Now, specifically to format a book, this is the way it's done, and I'll try and go through this painlessly. It's a little tedious, but it's that attention to detail that you will need to exhibit when you're writing your reference page. You have your author's names, last name first, a comma, the initials. This is the third, J. Olmsted III. In between the author's names, you have semicolons. Then you have the title of the book in italicized print, a comma, the edition number with ED period used as the abbreviation, a semicolon. This is the publisher's name. This is the place it was published, a comma, the year, semicolon, PP as the abbreviation for the page span, no punctuation there, and then a period at the end. In a book, the year is not bolded. Now, if you just used one chapter in a book, you wouldn't cite the whole book. You would put here the author of the chapter, the name of the chapter that you used, a period, and you would say it's in, capital I-N, and then the name of the whole book in italicized print, a comma, the edition, just like above here with the publication information following, a year, the page range, and a DOI in this case, because this book is electronic, so it has an address in cyberspace, you would use that. If your institution owns this book, you could read it freely. But a lot of these books that have DOIs, they are subscription books, and you have to have access to them in order to read them. Here's how to format a journal article. Here are all the authors' names separated by semicolons. You have the title of your article in regular type, then the abbreviation, official CASI abbreviation in italicized print. Again, the year is bolded, comma, volume number in italicized print, issue number in regular print, in parentheses, a comma, and a page span, and a DOI. Again, you would get those abbreviations at CASI. To format a web page, this can be tricky because some web pages have authors, some web pages have a corporate or an organizational author, some don't really have an author, and that is kind of this first example. It's a .com web page that like a periodic tables. So it's called Web Elements Periodic Table Chemical Reactions of Copper. You start out with the title, a period, and then the URL, followed by the date you accessed it in parentheses, using this style to put your date, the year, hyphen, your month, hyphen, your date in that month, and ending in a period. This one has a person who authored it, so that would go first. The title in italics, and again, the URL and the date it's accessed. We need to mention that when you write your lab report, you will be using passive voice. And I gave you two examples here. Passive voice means that you don't say that you did something. That's active voice. If you say, I poured 200 milliliters of distilled water in a beaker, that would be active voice. We want passive voice in your lab report. 200 milliliters of distilled water was poured into a 500 milliliter beaker, or the temperature was initially measured at 75 degrees centigrade. It's understood that all these actions were done by the experimenter. So you don't use the pronouns I or we, and you're not expressing an opinion. You're simply reporting what was done and what happened. So in a perfect world scenario, which is what we hope happens, you will learn all you can about the lab and the topics that are covered in class. When it comes time to write your lab report, you will use your textbook, your lab manual, your notes. You can discuss all of this in class, out of class, and then you need to have a private place and time to write your lab report using your brain and considering how to express what happened on your own. This slide just goes, again, a list of forms of plagiarism, so please don't include uncited data or information that's not your own, uncited ideas. And if you use another source and you quote directly, word for word, those phrases or sentences need to be in quotation marks, and you need to include the page number where they're from. It's best if you summarize another source in your own words, because that requires you to really understand it. So, I don't think a lab report should contain many quotes. You want to process the information, analyze it, and restate it in your own words. And of course, you don't misrepresent evidence or results or manufacture numbers. You have to work with what is actually real and present. And we've talked about improper collaboration and abetting plagiarism, two things you definitely don't do. When you're done, and when you've done what you shouldn't have, there are going to be red flags. Your instructors will know if you have worked together improperly because things will be too similar. Your phrasing, the ordering of elements in your lab report, what you emphasized, your graphs. None of this should be identical to someone else's. And if they are, that raises a red flag. And of course, there's also VeriCite or Turnitin, any of the plagiarism checkers. So it really furthers nobody's interest to plagiarize or collaborate when you shouldn't. This is a learning opportunity, and you should use that to your advantage to learn how to write a lab report. I mentioned that there is Zotero, which can help you format your references. I'm going to take you there. So back on the library homepage, if you wanted to learn how to use Zotero, it's under the research guides, under information literacy. You would learn how to install Zotero by just listening to this 1-minute explanation, and it really just takes 5 minutes to install it, a little bit of time to learn how to save citations. And that's very simple. You click a icon in your browser bar when you are on a web page that you want to save, or an article from a database that you're on and want to save it. In the interest of time, I'm just going to bring up my Zotero library. I have sorted, this is my entire library, a list of all the things I've saved over several years, and it just keeps adding to them. And because there's so many, I've organized them into folders, kind of like a playlist, and an Apple iTunes playlist. But if I would go to, I don't know, Zika, my Zika folder, there's a couple of articles in here I could format. So say I had these 2 articles in my lab report. I would right-click and ask Zotero to create a bibliography for me. I have installed the American Chemical Society style. Zotero comes with some other styles like APA, MLA, and so forth, but I've put some other ones in here that I also use. So I've added the ACS style. It copies it to a clipboard. I bring up a Word document, and it's a simple Control V, and it has formatted those 2 journal articles for me. Notice that this journal title has not been abbreviated, and I'm not sure if it's because it doesn't have one or because Zotero made a mistake. And that is something I want you to be aware of. All citation managers make mistakes. Zotero is actually very good at not making mistakes, but it does make them. So I would have to, check this against my template, make sure everything is right, but it certainly gets me 80% of the way there. So it would be to your advantage to consider using Zotero if you can. Okay, let me go back to my slide presentation, and I do caution you here to remember to double check citation managers because they do make mistakes. I'll close with this little quote from a colleague of mine. He said that unique expression comes from truly understanding. When we don't fully understand something, we lean on others' thoughts or expressions.